Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to be talking about anti-representationalism in philosophy, specifically in contemporary philosophy, in the three major thinkers from the contemporary philosophical tradition. So basically, it's the 20th century. Those figures will be Wittgenstein, Deleuze, and Rorty. So I will be putting them in chronological order. So in historically, Wittgenstein came first, then came Deleuze, and then came Rorty. So I won't be favoring any position over any other explicitly in this video, but I will be, ironically enough, trying to represent them as accurately as possible, their positions, to represent their positions as accurately as possible, and to see how they can be construed as anti-representationalists. So now I will try to explain what anti-representationalism is, generally speaking, or to give you a general picture of what the position is in philosophy. Well, not just in philosophy, but it is a position in philosophy and cognitive science, more specifically in the philosophy of mind, and philosophy of language or semantics, and philosophy of knowledge or theory of knowledge or epistemology, which construes intentional states, which are mental states that have a certain content or are about something, some content, trying to construe those states as being representations of something in the external world or the mind independent and the language independent world. That is representationalism. Representationalism would say that representation is central to how mind functions, how thought functions, how language functions, while anti-representationalism would say that we're trying to undermine that position and try to say that representation either isn't central or is derivative from some more fundamental relation to the world, or is non-existent at all. So we'll find varieties of those positions in various thinkers. So another way to construe representationalism is to look at it within the scheme of the possible metaphysical or epistemological viewpoints about being, how the world is, and its relation to our minds, or the relation of our minds to the world. Representationalism is also called indirect realism, where we can come to knowledge of the world, actual objective knowledge of the world, but only via the mediation, only via the medium of representations, which stand between our minds and the world, the objective world. Those representations are sort of pictures that we have of the world. They can be sensory, they can be conceptual, they can be linguistic, and we only come to know the world through them. So that is contrasted on the one side with direct realism, which says that we know the world as it is without the mediation of any mental representation. And on the other side, this is contrasted with idealism, which says that we don't really have knowledge. Either we don't have knowledge of the objective mind-independent world, or there is no objective mind-independent world in the sense of a material substance out there beyond our minds to which we can connect via representation. Now, after that short intro, I will say something about Wittgenstein, which is our first philosopher for today's video. Early Wittgenstein in the Tractatus, which is basically pretty much his only published work during his lifetime. With the philosophical investigations were published posthumously. He had some notebooks that, as far as I know, he didn't publish himself, but he kept like journals. He has books like the Brown Notebook, and the Blue Notebook. Also has books like Culture and Value, which are also sorts of his notes to himself. Whether he intended a publication or not, I cannot say for sure, but the early Wittgenstein in the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus presents a broadly representationalist view of thought and language, where he says that we have, on the side of the subject, on the side of our minds, on the side of our cognitive locuses, we have certain atomic propositions and molecular propositions. So atomic propositions are the most basic the most elementary, the most simple, the simplest propositions there are, and they relate. They have a happy one-to-one correspondence with objective states of affairs in the world. And molecular propositions then are complexes of those atomic propositions, and they correspond to complexes of the states of affairs in the world. So basically, there is no problem of going from our representations, our propositions, to the world itself. The world kind of presents itself unproblematically to us, and we can know stuff about it. So then we can argue that the shift from Wittgenstein's earlier to his later philosophy, motivated by his dissatisfaction with the former, displays a certain shift of his view on the relationship between various forms of language use, or as he will later come to call the language games. Namely, the early Wittgenstein of the logic, Tractatus Logico Philosophicus, saw the whole of language and what is almost inseparable, the whole of mind or mind's relation to the world, to be one of representation, or he will say picturing real states of affairs in the world. This is the picture theory of meaning. So representation there in that picture of knowledge and mind and language is the king language game, where the other kinds of linguistic practice are subordinate to it and parasitic on it. So later, when he came to realize that representation isn't as central as he thought, and there are many other language games that are equally, if not more, entitled to the status of a legitimate language game, things like joking, ordering, asking, etc. So not just asserting. So when he realized that, he gave up his earlier representationalism. So Robert Brandom will construe this problem as the problem of a downtown of language, with metaphor of a town which has or has not a downtown or a central place where all the most important happenings are going on. In contrast to Wittgenstein's pluralism or egalitarianism in this respect, Brandom will decidedly say that language does have a downtown. This downtown is the linguistic practice of giving and asking for reasons. So the central linguistic practice, or what is common to all linguistic or discursive practices, is putting forth claims or taking commitments, enjoying entitlements, defending one's claims against critique by offering good reasons in their favor, etc. So this focus on reasons makes this practice essentially normative and permeated by normative considerations of a good or justified or bad or unjustified claims and claimants, etc. So that is the essence of a language, what makes language language. So although Brandom offers a unified theory of language as normative, i.e. as commitment and entitlement based, naturally he won't oversimplify the picture by equating all linguistic practices as being of the same kind. Different domains of discourse involve linguistic practices that express different types of content. Notice the word express. So Brandom can perhaps be called a global expressivist, in that he portrays language as such as being expressive rather than descriptive, and not just some domain-specific type of linguistic practice or discursive practice, which would be a local as opposed to global expressivism, or the type that we see, for instance, in metaphysical expressivism, which as such applies to moral discourse only. So the Brandomian view has similarities and has its differences from the later Wittgenstein. It's similar in that it doesn't construe us. It doesn't take one language game as being representative for all language games, but he is different from Wittgenstein in that he asserts that language does have an essence, does have a downtown in this metaphor, which is given and asking for reasons, which characterizes all linguistic practices, what makes them linguistic practices. So now we'll speak about Deleuze, which is a second, historically speaking, second philosopher of these three. So when it comes to Deleuze, he will want to distance himself from representationalism and traditional philosophy as marked by it, and do due diligence and pay respect to and stay faithful to the nature of reality as he sees it, that is, as fluid, constantly changing and becoming. There are no fixed entities out there that one can simply represent by a fixed notion or idea, and ready-made categories cannot capture the ever-shifting flow of worldly happenings. By looking for identities and essences, we are practically trying to freeze the movement of things and extract something static from a dynamic process. So Deleuze emphasizes difference, becoming, and multiplicity as concepts that are more useful to talking about reality than identity, being, and singularity or particularity. The purpose of thought and philosophy is only and philosophy is only a mode of thought, so it also has all the essential characteristics of thought, is to create concepts and come up with problems, or rather follow problems where they lead naturally rather than offering artificial solutions and projecting and imposing an order onto the world, which is more characteristic of our ways of thinking than of the world itself. We are more to explore questions and come up with answers and ride the wave of change rather than try to build solid bases. Another important aspect of Deleuze's philosophy that relates to his anti-representationalism is the so-called inversion of Platonism. So in Plato's system, as Deleuze sees it, difference is subordinated to identity, which is characteristic for the worldview of representation, the world of representation. Once we do away with eternal and unchanging paradigms or models that are Plato's ideas, we free ourselves from the shackles of responsibility to that absolute realm and are completely free to create a specimen without the model or the copies, without an original, that he calls simulacra. So in simulacra are found the radical freedom, creativity, and affirmation that Deleuze wants to be characteristic of human life and thought in general, and philosophy also in particular. So now talk about Rorty. So for Rorty, representationalism as a philosophical position is a naive, although perhaps intuitive position. The concept which stands at its center, that a representation can properly do the job it is supposed to do, explain the workings of the human mind, knowledge, and semantic meaning. So the mind has traditionally been conceived as a representational machine whose job is to mirror nature, as Rorty poetically puts it in the title of his famous work, Philosophy in the Mirror of Nature. Mind's function then isn't mirroring reality, representing it, but coping with it and finding ways to live in its midst and fulfill one's practical purposes. The traditional Western philosophical ideals, which have been objective knowledge and truth, are replaced with the more down-to-earth tasks such as successfully dealing with one's environment and furthering one's goals. Rorty says at one point that we have been dealing with truth for so long and thinking about it, trying to discover its essence, but we still haven't completed the task to the general satisfaction. So maybe then it is time to give up on that striving and turn to more practical and realistic goals. Epistemic justification, which is in Rorty's special sense ethnocentric, replaces truth and solidarity. Solidarity among members of a community as an ethical ideal replaces objectivity as a cognitive or epistemic ideal. So we need to give up the notion of getting to the world as it is in itself and consider more carefully our actual situation, which is the world presented only mediated by our epistemic faculties. So in short, in fact, we are not on one side of the knowledge relation and the world is not on the other side. There is a simplistic dualism. In fact, us and the world are interpenetrating and interpermeating. We are continuous with the rest of the world. We are its part, and we don't have a privileged position of pure scientific observers. So for Rorty, we are not primarily cognitive beings, and the purpose of our minds is not primarily epistemic, but all learning and knowledge gathering serve a more fundamental practical purpose of dealing successfully with the world and its practical problems. So as pragmatism comes often together with an evolutionary viewpoint, it doesn't surprise much that pragmatists such as Dewey and Rorty say that we as biological beings are not best suited to be disinterested contemplators of the world and its workings, but we are beings who need to satisfy their basic needs by whatever means necessary and effective, including knowledge. So for Rorty, then, ethics and value theory take place of the traditional theoretical philosophical disciplines of metaphysics and epistemology as being more important, urgent, and answerable to our crucial needs. So Rorty's neo-pragmatism is then reflected in his view that beliefs that the traditional philosophy of cognitive science take as being ways of representing reality accurately, are more practical tools for orienting ourselves in our lives, and if there is any sense of talking of their truth, it is only in the sense of working and being effective that they are worthy of being kept. The quite practical aspect of Rorty's theory is that classical representationalism is seen as a sort of subservience in obedience to a non-human authority, which is in this case objective reality. So if our beliefs are our makings, why wouldn't we make them such that they serve our own purposes and not obey the all-powerful master of the world as it is? So here we see the relevance of anti-representationalism to anti-authoritarianism, where the freedom and sovereignty of the subject is seen as more important than truth as traditionally conceived. So the objective world is seen there as a surrogate for the notion of God from our more theistically inclined epochs, and full secularization would get rid of that too. By the way, we find a similar view in Nietzsche when he questions the unconditional value of truth as overriding all other considerations, where Nietzsche too could be seen as a sort of pragmatist in that sense. So in summary, what is common to all of these philosophers is the rejection of representation, either essential to thought and language, or as even as a viable concept. So what I want to note here, though, is that all three of these philosophers have, in addition to their anti-representationalism, also a certain aversion to, or distance from, or reservation for the title for themselves or philosopher as traditionally understood. So Wittgenstein, for one, later Wittgenstein that is, would want to distance himself from philosophy as traditionally done, maybe even the earlier Wittgenstein, but in a certain different sense. So Wittgenstein would want to distance himself from philosophy as traditionally done by certain principles, by certain principled theoretical quietism, where his dictum is "don't think but look." So he wants us to be, doesn't want to be understood as offering answers to traditional philosophical questions, but more as dissolving them and absolving us of the difficulties which they have presented in the past. So we will often, when you read the philosophical investigations, you will see him dealing with rather concrete examples and trying to show his point rather than abstractly speculate about the nature of language, which is his central point, his central topic there. So Deleuze, for his part, also has major problems with traditional Western philosophy, in that it seems to him largely trying to represent the world by use of fixed categories, where term logic sees both a subject and object term, or what they stand for, substance and accident, as being static and self-identical entities or properties and relations. He wants new conceptual tools to understand the world, which is in constant motion and change. Also, thought is not supposed to represent an objective world as accurately as possible, but engage itself in a more creative project that is more akin to art. And lastly, Rorty sees his pragmatism as placing him outside the rubric of philosophy, at least as traditionally understood and done, where he may not even may even want to be called an anti-philosopher, since he sees many traditional philosophical debates and questions as futile and misguided. So maybe anti-representationalism as a topic, it makes one distance oneself from traditional philosophy, and maybe question its ways and try to come up with an alternative way of thinking, even if it doesn't want to call even if they don't want to call it philosophy. So that has been it for this video. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. Please consider liking, sharing, subscribing, commenting, and stuff like that, all the good stuff like that. And I will sign out right here. And until next time, bye-bye to everyone.